All right, Introductory Algebra Homework 8. Writing a signed number for a real-world situation. Here they just want you to either write a negative number or the positive number, which doesn't need the sign, to represent what happened. Charmaine's test score average decreased by 16 points this semester. Since it decreased, we're going to write it as a negative 16. It went down by 16 points. The population of a certain city increases by 29,000 people. So if it increases, we don't need the positive sign in front of it. We're just going to put the 29,000 down. So positive 29,000 because it increased. So if I move the board here, number 2 says the population of a certain city decreases by 38,000 people. Again, this one decreases, so we want to show it as a negative number. So negative 38,000. The second part, the temperature fell by 13 degrees Fahrenheit. If the temperature fell, it went down. So negative 13 is how we're going to represent that the temperature fell by 13 degrees Fahrenheit today. Go ahead and do number 3 while I move the board. So number 3, a car corporation produced 1,780 fewer cars this month than last. If they're fewer, it dropped by 1,780, so negative 1,780. Joe deposited $80 into his savings account. That means he has $80 more. We're just going to put 80. We don't need the plus sign in front. So those hopefully are simple enough. Number 4, 5, and 6. We are going to find a common denominator in order to order our fractions. What we want to know is 7/8 greater than or less than 9/10? You might know already, but in case you don't know, what you would do is you'd find your common denominator and compare your fractions. So if I have an 8 and a 10, I'm looking for my least common multiple. I'm going to start with 10. 8 doesn't go into 10, so I do 20. 8 doesn't divide into 20, so I try 30. 8 doesn't divide into 30, so I try 40. Oh, 8 divides into 40. 40 is my least common multiple. Now, if you're really stuck and you can't figure out what your least common multiple is, you could take 8 times 10 and make them 80. Your numbers will just be bigger, so we like to use the smallest one we can. In this case, then we make our equivalent fraction. 8 divides into 40. 5 times 7 is 35. 10 divides into 40. 4 times 9, 36. So if we're going to compare 35/40ths to 36/40ths, we know that 35 is less than 36. Since these are equivalent to these, we then know that 7/8 is going to be less than 9/10. So number 5, we want to find our least common multiple of 9 and 21 in order to find our common denominator. Multiples of 21. 21. 9 doesn't go into 21. 21 times 2, 42. 9 doesn't divide into 42. 21 times 3, 63. Oh, 9 divides into 63. 63 is my least common multiple. Making my equivalent fraction. 9 goes into 63 7 times. 7 times 2 is 14. 21 goes into 63 3 times. 3 times 4 is 12. So 14 over 63 compared to 12 over 63. We know that 14 is greater than 12, and so 2/9 is going to be greater than 4 over 21. Go ahead, try number 6 while I'm moving the board here. So first thing you wanted to think about there, what is my common denominator? What's my least common multiple of 4 and 7? 4 and 7 don't have any common factors, so you end up having to take 4 times 7, and 28 then should be your common denominator. Then you made your equivalent fractions. 4 went into 28 7 times. 7 times 1 was 7. 7 went into 28 8 times. 2 times 8. I better do that again. 7 goes into 28 4 times. 2 times 4 is 8. Sometimes my head works faster than my hand and my mouth. So 7 went into 28 4 times. 2 times 4 is 8. I'm comparing 7 28ths to 8 28ths. We know that 7 is less than 8, so 7 28ths is less than 8 28ths. That means 1/4 is going to be less than 2 sevenths. The next one, we are ordering integers, less than and greater than. If I'm thinking about my number line, and I have 0 there, I have -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7, -8, -9, -10. If I am comparing -10 to -1, it's on the left side. Since -10 is on the left side of -1, it has a lower value. I like to think of it like the temperature. If the temperature is -10 degrees, or if the temperature is -1 degree, -10 is a lower temperature than -1. So -10 is less than -1. So with negative numbers, the bigger number actually ends up having the lower value. If I'm comparing -6 to -7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here's -6, here's -7. -6 is on the right side of -7. If it's on the right side, it actually has a bigger value. If you think about the temperature, if the temperature is -6 and the temperature is -7, -6 is going to be greater than -7. It's a higher temperature. On the bottom one, I'm comparing a +6 to a -2. Here's -2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, the 6 is to the right side of the -2. We probably already know that any positive number is always bigger than a negative number, so +6 is going to be greater than -2. Number 8, -11 compared to -2. -11 would be a lower temperature than -2, so -11 is less than -2. -8 compared to -5. -8 again is lower than -5, so it is less. And then I have a +2 compared to -9. Positive numbers are always bigger than negative numbers, so 2 is greater than -9. Go ahead, try number 9 there. Put in your inequality symbols, your less thans and your greater thans. And so, if we compared -5 to -10, -5 would be a higher temperature than -10. -5 is greater than -10. Now I'm comparing two positive numbers, 5 compared to 12. 5 degrees would be less than 12 degrees, so 5 is less than 12. -7 compared to +7. -7 would be a lower temperature than +7. We know that a negative is always less than a positive, so -7 is less than 7. Square roots. Square roots are the opposite of squaring. They're saying what number to the second power would give me 25. You hopefully know that 5 times 5, 5 squared is 25. So when you do the square root of 25, they're asking you what number squared is 25. You get the nice whole number 5. You do have a square root button on your calculator. On your calculator, your square root button is right next to the fraction button. If I do the square root of 25 and hit equals, I get that nice whole number 5 because 25 is a perfect square. So if I wanted to find the square root of 16, the square root of 16, what number squared is 16? 4. 4 times 4 is 16. So what is the value of the square root of 49? What number squared gives me 49? Well, hopefully you know that 7 times 7, excuse me, 7 times 7 is 49. So the square root of 49 should just be 7. I'm going to get a drink here quick. And if I move my board. 13, 14, 15 wants to do the absolute value. Absolute value is a distance. So when you think about distances and you think about if I went from Sisseton to Agency Village, I went approximately 7 miles. If I said I'm going to go from Agency Village to Sisseton, I still say I'm going approximately 7 miles. I don't go negative 7 miles. When you drive somewhere, you're not probably driving backwards and going negative miles. Even if you are driving backwards, you're still going a positive number of miles. So these little straight up and down bars mean absolute value. It makes your number positive. Technically what it means is how far is negative 12 from 0? Negative 12 is 12 places from 0 on your number line. If you counted from negative 12 to 0, you'd get 12. How far is 6 places from 0? The absolute value of 6 is going to be 6, because 6 is 6 places from 0 on your number line. It made the numbers positive. Whether it was negative or positive, they're both positive because they're distances. The absolute value of negative 8. How far is negative 8 from 0? It's 8 places. The absolute value of a positive 9. How far is 9 from 0? It's 9 places. So number 15, go ahead and evaluate what's the absolute value of 10 and what's the absolute value of negative 14. So you said the absolute value of 10. How far is 10 from 0? It's 10 places. What's the absolute value of negative 14? Well, negative 14 is 14 places from 0. So the absolute value of negative 14 is 14. So those straight up and down bars mean absolute value. How far is that number from 0? Always is going to be a positive answer, or 0 if you happen to have 0. Adding integers. Adding positive and negative numbers. Your rules are, if the signs are the same, add and keep the sign. We know that if we take 2 plus 3, those are both positive. 2 plus 3 we add is 5, and we keep the sign. If we do a negative 2 plus a negative 3, they're going to put that in parentheses just to separate those signs. I like to think of these in terms of money. If I owe $2 and I owe $3 more, I don't end up with positive money. I still owe money. I add the values, the 2 plus the 3, and then I keep the sign. Negative 5 would be my answer. If my signs are opposite. Hopefully you wrote smaller than me and you can fit it on your paper. Subtract the value of the numbers and take the sign of the bigger number. If I am doing 2 plus negative 3, I have $2. I owe $3. I'm going to be in the hole. I'm going to owe money. I'm going to owe $1. So when they tell you to subtract, you're going to take the bigger number minus the smaller number, ignoring the signs. 3 minus 2 is 1. I take the sign of the bigger one, so it's going to be negative 1. If I would have 5 plus negative 2, I have $5. I owe $2. I'm going to have 3 extra dollars. I'm going to be to the positive 3. My rule, subtract the numbers. 5 minus 2 is 3. Take the sign of the bigger, it stays positive. So up here, I'm adding 4 plus negative 5. This is positive, this is negative. I subtract. 5 minus 4 is 1. I take the sign of the larger, negative 1. I have $4. I owe $5. I'm $1 short. $1 in the hole. Here, I have a negative 3 plus another negative 3. They're both negative. I add and keep the sign. 3 plus 3 is 6. I keep the sign. It's going to be negative. I owe you $3. I owe you $3 more. Now I owe you $6 altogether. I'm $6 in the hole. Number 17. Negative 5 plus a negative 4. Both of them are negative. My rule, add and keep the sign. 5 plus 4 is 9. I keep the sign. It's negative. I owe you $5. I owe you 4 more dollars. I'm $9 in the hole, minus 9. Here, we have negative 6 plus 6. This is kind of a special case because what I have are opposites. A negative 6 plus a 6. My signs are opposite. I subtract, which is 0. Tells me to take the sign of the larger, but 0 doesn't have a sign. It isn't positive or negative, so we just have 0. We know that 6 minus 6 is 0. So when I'm adding opposites, I get an answer of 0. Go ahead while I move the board, do number 18. So number 18, we have negative 4 plus negative 3. They're both negative. I add and keep the sign, so negative 7 hopefully is what you came up with for an answer. Then we had 2 plus negative 3. My signs are opposite. I subtract and take the sign of the bigger number. 3 minus 2 is 1. The bigger one is negative, so negative 1 hopefully is what you came up with for an answer. Now when we do 19, 20, and 21, you're doing the same rules. They just have bigger numbers to work with. So we have negative 58 plus 32. One is positive, one is negative, so I subtract and take the sign of the larger one. 58 minus 32 would be 26. The larger one is negative, so negative 58 plus 32 is negative 26. Here we have negative 42 plus a negative 49. They're both negative. My rule, add and keep the sign. So if I add them, I get 91. I keep the sign, so it's negative. So negative 42 plus a negative 49 is negative 91. Number 20. 53 plus a negative 30. One is positive, one is negative. My rule is to subtract and take the sign of the larger. 53 minus 30 would be 23. The bigger one is positive, so my answer is positive. 53 plus negative 30 is positive 23. Negative 56 plus a negative 30. Both of them are negative. I add and keep the sign. So adding those, I get 86. I keep the sign, so negative 56 plus negative 30 is negative 86. Go ahead, do number 21 there. Number 21. Negative 56 plus negative 25. They're both negative. My rule is add and keep the sign. So if I add those, I get 81. I keep the sign. It's going to be negative 81. Then I have 35 plus negative 41. One is positive, one is negative. So my rule, subtract. 41 minus 35 is 6. Take the sign of the larger one. So negative 6 should be the answer you came up with. 35 plus negative 41 should be negative 6. (22, 23, 24), we're now into subtraction. Technically, subtraction is adding the opposite. I could rewrite my problems of subtraction as 1 plus a negative 5 and negative 3 plus a negative 8. However, why rewrite the problems? Think of the exact same rules as we had for addition. If my signs in front are opposites, we subtract and take the sign of the larger. If the signs in front are the same, we add and keep the sign. So I have a positive 1 minus a 5. My signs are opposite. I'm going to subtract. 5 minus 1 is 4. I take the sign of the larger, so I get negative 4. Here, the 3 is negative. The 8 also has a negative or a minus sign in front. Since the signs in front are the same, my rule is to add and keep the sign. 8 plus 3 is 11. I keep the sign, so negative 3 minus 8 is going to be negative 11. If you think about being at negative 3 on your number line and then going back 8 more, you end up at negative 11. So on Alex, they'll probably rewrite them all just to remind you that subtraction is adding the opposite, but I'm not going to rewrite them all. I'm just going to think of my rules for adding. Negative 7 minus 4. They both have minus signs in front. I'm going to add and keep the sign. 7 plus 4 is 11. I keep my sign, so it's negative 11. 2 minus 5. 1 is positive, 1 is negative. I subtract. 5 minus 2 is 3. I take the sign in front of the bigger number, so it's going to be negative 3. If I'm at positive 2 and I go back 5 places on my number line, I'm going to end up at a negative 3. Go ahead and do number 24 here while I move the board. So number 24, 4 minus 6. 1 is positive, 1 is negative. I subtract and take the sign of the bigger one. 4 minus 6 should give you negative 2. Negative 5 minus 3. They both have negative signs in front of them. I add and keep the sign. So negative 5 minus 3 is negative 8. Now number 25, 26, and 27 have the rule for subtraction. Subtraction is adding the opposite. So I'm going to do negative 5. I'm going to add the opposite of a negative 10, which is a positive 10. So whenever you see that you have minus a negative, the opposite of a negative is going to be replaced with a plus sign. 6 plus positive 9. So this is a case where I do have to rewrite my problem, because when I have subtracting a negative, I'm always going to change it to a positive. Then I'm going to do my subtraction and adding like I normally do. Negative 5 plus 10. My signs are opposite. I subtract and take the sign of the larger. 10 minus 5 is 5. The bigger one is positive. 6 plus 9. Well, both of those are positive. I'm just going to add 6 plus 9. I get 15. So if I have 9 minus a negative 5, I'm just going to make it 9 plus 5 instead. Changing my minus a negative to a positive. 9 plus 5 is 14. Negative 3 minus a negative 1. I'm going to replace the minus a negative with a positive. So negative 3 plus 1. A negative 3 plus 1. My signs are opposite. I subtract and take the sign of the larger. Negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. So go ahead and do number 27 there. So number 27, again we have that minus a negative. We're going to change it to a plus. So 7 plus 3, 7, 8, 9, 10 is going to be my answer. Here again we have the minus a negative. We're going to change it to a plus. So negative 4 plus 2. My signs are opposite. I subtracted and took the sign of the larger one. Negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. 28, 29, 30, doing the same things, they just have bigger numbers, and mix the rules together to see if you can keep track of what to do. Negative 39 minus 35. They both have minus signs in front. I'm going to add and keep my sign. So I'm going to get 74. It's going to stay negative. 5 minus a negative 6. I've got minus a negative. I've got to change it to a plus. 5 plus 6 gives me 11. Number 29, negative 10 minus a negative 5. Again, I've got that minus a negative. I've got to change it to a plus. So negative 10 plus 5, subtract and take the sign of the larger. I should get negative 5. Negative 23 minus 41. They're both negative. I add and keep the sign. So if I add those, I get 64. Stays negative. So negative 64 is my answer. Go ahead, do number 30. So number 30, we have 26 minus 49. This is positive, this is negative. My rule, subtract and take the sign of the larger. So if I subtract, I get 23. The larger one is negative. So 26 minus 49 should be negative 23. And the last one on number 30, 4 minus a negative 11. I have the minus the negative. I've got to do 4 plus 11. And so hopefully 15 is what you came up with your answer. And of course, on all of these adding and subtracting ones, you can punch them into your calculator and check them. I would advise you that if there are parentheses, to use the parentheses. Not that it's going to make any difference on the adding and subtracting, but when we get into other problems, if you start leaving parentheses off of stuff, you're not going to get the right answers. So it's a good habit, if you're going to use your calculator to check things, to type them in just like you see them, and that way the calculator knows what you're doing and should come up with the right answer. That is the end of homework day 8.